Good evening and welcome to a Bugajski Hour Washington special. And our special guest today is Congressman Eliot Engel. Welcome to the show, Eliot, and thank you very much for allowing us to interview you in your office on Capitol Hill. And I wanted to say a few words, a little background about the Congressman for our viewers. The ranking Congressman has represented New York in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1989. He is especially known in Albania and the region as chair of the Bipartisan Albanian Issues Caucus and as an effective campaigner for Albanian interests in Washington. Since the collapse of communism in Albania, he has been at the forefront in assisting the emerging democracy achieving its potential by joining the major international institutions and forging a close relationship with the United States. He was also instrumental, let me say, in pushing for Kosovo's liberation and independence. Pardon my pun, Eliot, but one could say that both Albania and Kosovo in the past 20 years have moved from Marx to Engel. But congratulations. Let me jump straight into the questions. Albania this year, as you know, is celebrating 100 years of its statehood, of its independence. And it's been over 20 years since the collapse of communism and the beginning of the democratic process. How would you describe Albania's progress? What are the problems? What are the challenges?
Well, I think Albania's made wonderful progress. Obviously, there's still plenty to do and a long way to go. But if you take a look at Albania when I first came to Congress in 1989 and Albania today in 2012, it's like night and day. The first time I stepped foot in Albania was 1993. And I remember it being in Tirana. It was very different than the Tirana of today. And I remember staying in Enver Hoxha's guest house, which wasn't a very nice guest house, but everyone thought it was wonderful at the time. But the one thing I did remember, my very first impression of the first time I came to Albania, were when I went to speak to the crowd, everyone was chanting, USA, USA, USA. And of course, I'm very familiar with the Albanian culture and with Albanians because I come from New York City, and many of my close friends are Albanian Americans and have been for many, many years. But still, you know, when you go to Albania, there are few countries where Americans are greeted more heartily and in a more friendly way than Albania. And that's a wonderful feeling when you do that. And so I have been proud in Congress all these years to act as not only the co-chair of the Albanian Issues Caucus, which I founded back in 1989, but also to be an advocate for Albania, for Albanians in Kosovo, for Albanians in Macedonia and Montenegro, because I think it's a very important, there are important issues for me to push. But when you look at Albania now, Albania is a proud member of NATO. We hope that Albania will soon be a member of the European Union. We know that Albania is committed to integrating itself into the Western Alliance, obviously with the membership of NATO. But when you think about it, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, I mean, I remember being taught that Albania was the most repressive of all the communist-dominated countries in Europe, that it had an alliance with China because the Soviet Union wasn't orthodox enough for the Albanian communists. And then Albania, if I remember correctly, broke with China because they thought China wasn't orthodox enough. So you take a country, and what's really magnificent about the Albanian people is here are people for 50 years were told day in and day out that the United States was their enemy, that capitalism was terrible, that the United States was by far and away the worst thing that could happen to the world. Those bunkers that Enver Hoxha built, 2 million of them all across Albania. I remember the first time I was in Albania seeing them and thinking, my God, talk about paranoia, you know. And a country and a people that were told this day in and day out, that the United States is your enemy. And it turns out they did not believe it one bit. And that's really amazing. And I remember people telling me when I first came to Albania that they were listening to Italian TV and radio all those years and that was part of the outlet. But it just goes to show you, so the Albanian people, in my estimation, are really remarkable because you cannot get better friends to America than the Albanian people. And yet their leaders for all those years told the people that the Americans were their enemies, not their friends. So I take great pride in helping to cement that Albanian-American friendship and to help strengthen it and make it stronger, and everything I can do to help Albania, certainly, and Albanians in Kosovo, the country of Kosovo. I was the first one in Washington to call for the independence for Kosovo, and also the Albanians.
I remember us standing on the border together in Macedonia, Kosovo border, and they wouldn't give us visas.
You remember that?
I remember you said, Mr. Milosevic, what are you doing to the Albanian people over the border?
You know what else I said? I said, today I want to try to get into Kosovo, and Milosevic won't let me in, but I have news for him. One day we're going to all be in a free and independent Kosovo, and we're not going to let him in. And of course that did come to pass, so I was a prophet.
You're a prophet as well, yeah. Well, let me ask you about US policy, Eliot. Would you say it's been successful? Are there still some things that need to be done? In particular, the role of the ambassador. That's always been questioned in Tirana. Should he be more intrusive, less intrusive? Is he objective, impartial enough? What's your view?
Well, you know, to a large degree, this is also true with Kosovo, but with Albania, I think the U.S. ambassador plays a very important role. And, you know, while the United States cannot ever be telling other countries what to do or dictating to other countries, it's obvious that in Albania, in Tirana, in the government, there's a great realization that their best friend in the world is the United States. And therefore, we in the United States really do have the best interests of the Albanian nation at heart. And so I think that suggestions that are made or you know, a little cajoling or pushing that's done is done with all good intentions and should be looked at it that way. However, the decision will be made by Albanians, not by Americans. But I think that it's helpful for the Albanian government to understand or to know what Americans are thinking and what advice we would give. And you know, hopefully the advice will be taken. And if not, Albania is a sovereign nation. It doesn't have to listen to anybody. But I think that the relationship, by and large, has been good. Of course, you know, it varies with different ambassadors. Different ambassadors have different styles. But by and large, I think it's been really, really good. And you know, getting back to what you asked me before, when I go to Tirana now, it's a modern, you know, city in Europe. The cafes are lovely, the young people are lovely, the old people are lovely. Wasn't like that when I first got there. You know, no hotels in Tirana, no cars, you know, monuments to revolutions all over the place, you know, these old communist monuments. So I think in many ways, Albania has moved positively along, faster in the past 20 years than any other nation. And it's a great feather in the Albanian government's cap, in my opinion, that Albania is a member of NATO. I mean, that's like gold. Yeah. And so you know, there are still problems. We all know what they are, and we have to work on them. But I think Albania is moving in the right direction. And I intend to be in Albania, by the way, at the end of November, when the 100th anniversary of independence is celebrated. Sally Berisha personally invited me, and it comes very well because it's after our elections, and it's after our Thanksgiving holiday, so it actually comes in very, very well in my schedule. So I am really looking forward to, again, coming to Albania for this 100th anniversary celebration.
Fantastic. Maybe you can stop it by in the studio. I could do a quick interview with you at the studio in Tirana. Let me ask you, Eliot, one of the things sense I get in Tirana is that the political relationship between the US and Albania is excellent. But on the economic side, on the cultural side, business can still be developed, trade can still be developed, cultural ties can still be developed. How important is American investment in such areas as energy, infrastructure, agriculture, tourism, and so forth? What are your views?
Well, I would hope there'd be more. You know, I've participated in a lot of investment forums in New York. We've had several through the years about investment in Albania. I would like to see more investment in Albania. Of course, people who have the money to invest, want to see a climate that's conducive for investors. I think there has been lots of positive changes in Albania to make it more conducive for people to want to invest. But there always needs to be more, and these are things that the governments, our two governments, really need to continue to work on.
Hmm. And presumably that American connection, it will strengthen that American connection with more U.S.
Well, it will, and let me say something else. I think the diaspora, the Albanians living in the United States, who are now American citizens, so Albanian Americans, can play a very important role and need to play an important role and should play an important role in facilitating that. We want Albanian Americans to invest in Albania, but we want all Americans to invest in Albania. And I think it's important, by the way, that the government of Albania keeps close ties with the American Albanian diaspora in places like New York, where I'm from, or Detroit, or Chicago, or other places, Boston, where there are huge amounts of Albanian Americans. I think it's very, very important. I have worked very closely with a group called NAC, the National Albanian American Council, and I'm happy that Sally Berisha has many times come to the NAC dinners. They have them once a year. I think in another week or so there's going to be another dinner. I don't know if he intends to come. It's always similar time to the September UN, United Nations gatherings in New York, and so. But I think those ties are very, very important.
Right. Would you say a little bit outline the Albanian Issues Caucus, exactly how many people are involved, how many congressmen are involved? It's a bipartisan effort. How many are involved? How effective? What are the major priorities of the caucus?
Well, I formed it back in 1989 with Susan Molinari, who then was a Republican congresswoman from New York, and she and I, in fact, went to Albania and Kosovo together in those early years. I made it bipartisan because it's important for it to be bipartisan. I don't want it to ever be one party. And there are, by the way, a lot of other countries that have caucuses that have emulated us. We were one of the first ones to do so for a particular people or caucus. Now you've got it over time. The other day we were at the Brazil caucus and things like that. But I have remained the co-chair for the 23 years, 24 years I've been in Congress. And we've changed Republicans because some of them, Susan Molinari left, and we had others. The current chair is Jean Schmidt from Ohio, and she is leaving the Congress at the end of this year. So next year we'll have another co-chair who will be Robert Adderholt of Alabama. And I believe that he will be in Albania with me during the 100th anniversary of independence. So what we try to do in the caucus is we try to project the issues that are important, issues for Albania, such as EU membership, for Kosovo, which would be NATO membership, EU membership, the difficulties that both countries have, and the plight of Albanians as a minority in Montenegro and Macedonia. We have been effective in bringing these issues to the fore. We were effective during the 1999 War for Independence in Kosovo of trying to bring members of Congress around to support the American intervention, the bombing of the Serbs who were trying to commit genocide, ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. So I think, it's an interesting thing because back in my first or second year in Congress, we had a fight on the House floor about supporting the Albanians in Kosovo for independence, and it was defeated because most people said, well, we don't want to take sides in the Yugoslav Civil War. And I really realized that we had a great job of education to do to members of Congress. So that's also what we've tried to do. Whenever we have Albanian officials come in from Albania, from Kosovo, from Macedonia, Montenegro, we have lunches for them, we have little receptions for them, we want as many members of Congress to meet them. Now, of course, if you're a member of Congress and you don't come from an area where there are many Albanians, you might not be all that interested. But we feel that we can at least be there as resource people to let these people understand how we define the issues and what they are. And of course, I come at it always from a point of view of Albanian advocacy. and the Albanian Issues Caucus is not some kind of impartial, it may be bipartisan, but it's not an impartial issue, the kind of impartial group that looks at all sides of the issue. No, we take a very pro-Albanian,
very specific objectives,
side of issues in the Balkans, starting with Albania, of course, and Kosovo, but also Macedonia and Montenegro. We advocate a pro-Albanian point of view.
You mentioned the diaspora, very important in terms of, on the economic side, maintaining relations, remittances, maintaining relations with Albania. Do you notice that Albanians are becoming, as Americans, once they move here, once they become citizens, are becoming more involved on the political side also in American politics? In other words, the next generation, are we going to see more Albanian politicians, maybe Albanian members of Congress?
Well, I hope so. That would be nice. I know in where I come from in the Bronx, New York, we have a very prominent Albanian running for the state assembly, and his primary was yesterday, and the last results I saw he was ahead. Well, they were inconclusive. I think it's only natural. You know, I've seen a change in the Albanian diaspora in America too. Many people came to the United States in the 1960s and 1970s with the shirts on their backs, very, very poor. You know, like all immigrants in the United States. My grandparents, 100 years ago, came to the United States from Eastern Europe as you know, as refugees. They were persecuted. They were Jewish refugees in the Ukraine. They were persecuted, and they left to come to America for a better life. It's the same reason Albanians come here for a better life. And luckily, and with hard work, the Albanian work ethic, of which I'm very much aware, many have done very, very well and have become quite comfortable, quite wealthy, and many of them have not forgotten their roots. And so they you know, put their money where their mouth is and try to help Albanians here in the United States, but also to help Albanians in Albania, Kosovo, etc. That is also with the investing and things like that that we spoke about before. So I think it's natural. The community in the United States has gotten more affluent, and as communities get affluent, they start moving out of the little entity that they lived in when they first came, and many live in quite beautiful homes in the nicest suburbs, and many have not forgotten their roots, and so they spend a lot of their own personal money in trying to provide help for Albanians, also in terms of investing. So it's natural. You know, as I said, I'm the grandson of 4 immigrants, and I'm in the United States Congress. I'm sure there will be many grandchildren or maybe children of Albanian immigrants, maybe even Albanian immigrants, who run for Congress and win, because that's the American dream. That's why we love and appreciate the United States of America, because we have the opportunity here that so many people don't have all around the world.
You mentioned that one of the objectives is to get Albania into the European Union, eventually Kosovo as well. How do you view the EU role? Are they being active enough in drawing Albania in?
Well, I've been a little disappointed in the EU role. I think that the EU is obviously very important, and you know, particularly in the dispute in Kosovo with the Serbs in the north of Mitrovica. You know, I say that hopefully one day every country will be a member of the European Union, and therefore borders won't be all that important, because if everybody is a member of the EU, then borders will be porous. People can go back and forth, and that's really the way it should be. And I would have hoped that maybe that would cause the Serbs to be less you know, aggressive or less not moving off their positions. But it hasn't really happened. There are 5 EU countries today that still don't recognize Kosovo. That's not very helpful. I think the EU, frankly, again in terms of Kosovo, looks the other way when the Serbs sign agreements with the Pristina government and then they do not implement those agreements, do not actually do what they have agreed to do. I don't think the EU has been forceful enough in saying to them, listen, you must abide by all agreements that are signed. And so I do think the EU could play a better role. With regard to Albania, I think it's preposterous that Albania is a member of of NATO, but not the EU. I mean, if you're a member of NATO, you should have the leg up for membership in the European Union. And while I understand that the EU today is having difficulties, and the currency may collapse, and it's a problem with Greece and other countries, I still think the EU could be doing more to help integrate Albania, as part of part of Europe. Albania is obviously an important country. I also think that I want to raise this because I don't want to end our conversation and say, oh, gee, I didn't say this. I am very hopeful that tourism, by the way, can be a source of revenue for Albania. A couple of years ago, I went to the south, to Saronda, and so there's other places right near the Greek border. And I think those are beautiful areas just waiting to be developed. And I'm hopeful that that will happen. And I'm hoping the EU can play a role in bringing tourists to Albania, which would be a nice help for the Albanian economy. And basically, I think tourists can get a lot of, for their money, they can do very well in Albania with tourism. So I'm hoping, but I would say the EU has been a mixed bag right now.
Right. Let me ask you the last couple of questions, Eliot. In terms of qualifying for European Union candidacy status and eventual membership, should the Albanians themselves presumably have to do more in terms of the government, the parliament, the opposition, to think of national interests rather than party personal interests? Would you say that's the case?
Yes. Look, we have our differences here in the United States. By far and away, we are not a perfect democracy. I'm unhappy with the United States Congress. I don't think that the majority is doing what it should do to compromise and bring things along. And so we've got a lot of problems here in the United States too. But in Albania, when there is a virtual standstill between two parties, when there's violence, when it looks as if there's some sort of a coup attempt, when one of the major parties doesn't go to the parliament. To me, it shows the rest of the world, or it appears to the rest of the world, that Albania is not quite there yet in terms of perfecting its democracy. Now, I'm not taking sides in Albanian politics. I never have and I never will. But I do think that it's important that the elections in Albania be respected. If there are flaws, if there are irregularities, then there are mechanisms in Albania, the courts and whatever, to go through that. But if we're going to disregard a close election and make it impossible for the parliament to function, then I look at the bigger picture, not one party or the next. I look at how does it appear, how does Albanian democracy appear? And people will then say, well, you know what, the institutions aren't strong enough, and maybe the country's not quite ready for the European Union. I think that's a wrong conclusion. I think Albania is ready, and but I think that since Albania is being watched and scrutinized for future membership, it's important to keep that in mind when there are disputes in Albania. And again, I say that with all great affection for the Albanian political system. Our political system here in the United States, has some difficulties. But in 2000, many of us thought that Al Gore was the winner in the presidential election, and were unhappy when the election was sort of handed to George Bush by the Supreme Court. But the very next day, and it was a 5-4 decision, there were no attempted coups, there were no tanks in the street, there was no violence. It was what it was. And I'm still, unhappy with it. But that showed, I accepted it because that was American democracy. I think that the Albanian political establishment needs to think about these things. How does the total picture reflect on how Albania is perceived by the rest of the world, particularly the EU, in terms of its democratic institutions?
Right. And sometimes the people are more let's say, ready for the European Union than some of the politicians in the country. But you're
Right.
saying the country as a whole is prepared and ready.
Right. Well, I think that's, you know, if you would ask me what's the one thing, if I could see one thing for Albania's future, there are many things I'd like to see. Obviously, we're concerned about unemployment, we're concerned about creating jobs, but the one thing would be I want to see Albania in the European Union. I think that is something that I will continue to fight for and continue to push in Washington with whatever influence I have to talk to members of the European Union. I think it's very important that Albania keeps moving forward.
Do you think there's sufficient attention by this administration, the Obama administration, to the Balkans, to Albania, to Kosovo?
You know, we have this question with regard to Latin America and the Caribbean. You know, I have chaired what we call the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, which is Latin America, the Caribbean, Canada. And when George Bush was president, I said, you know, we haven't paid enough attention to our own Western Hemisphere, our own backyard. And I think I can say the same thing with the Obama administration. I think to a degree, it's less so with the Balkans, but I still would like to see the U.S. administration pay more attention to it. In fairness, we have a lot of worries around the world. President Obama inherited 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that had to be his priority, and it is. He successfully ended the war in Iraq, and we are on the way to ending the war in Afghanistan. I think the American public is war-weary, war-tired. I think that's important. I think the whole issue of Iran and Iran's nuclear weapon is of paramount importance to the United States and to the Obama administration. I think that is something that President Obama has been dealing with very closely and looking at very closely. So there are pressing problems. Now we have the Arab Spring, and we have all these demonstrations in Egypt and Yemen and everywhere else, Tunisia, Morocco. So he's dealing with that. So I think that what happens is you deal with crises, and you don't necessarily deal with things that are still festering but are not quite crises. And I think that that's what's happened in the Balkans. We've had relative quiet over the past 4 years, and so it's not something that you regard as being on fire. So you tend to look at it a little less closely. But I want to tell you, I have spoken to President Obama. I can tell you I've discussed the Balkans with him. I can tell you that he has nothing but great regard and respect and admiration for the Albanian people, that he feels a strong commitment to Albania's well-being and Kosovo's well-being, and that will continue, I believe. I am a supporter of his for re-election, and I hope he will be re-elected, and I will be right there continuing to press him to make sure that this country, the United States of America, will always do right by Albanians in the Balkans.
Last question, Eliot. I remember we stood at an airport once. I think we were on our way to Skopje, and I asked you, why are you so committed to the Albanian cause? Because it's not a constituency question for you specifically. And I remember you saying, I always support the underdog at that time. How would you characterize, why are you so supportive of the Albanian people?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. First of all, I have grown up in the Bronx, and I'm fortunate. I was born in the Bronx, which is a part of New York City for those people who don't know. And I was raised in the Bronx, and I still live in the Bronx. So I'm a hometown boy. I have lived in my district since I was 12 years old. And for my first 12 years, I lived in an adjoining district, which is also in the Bronx. So I've always lived in the Bronx. In the 1970s, I noticed that there were Albanians moving into the Bronx, that it was a place of Albanians moving in. I learned that they were from Kosovo, most of them at the time. And so I was keenly aware of the Albanian issues. When I was elected to Congress in 1989, some Albanian Americans came into my office to talk to me about Kosovo and Albania. And one of them was someone whom I now consider my best friend, and that's Harry Barakhtari of New York, who came to me and started to talk to me about it. And I really became very committed to the Albanian cause. And the more I became committed, the more people came up to me to tell me, thank you for what you've done. And when I went to Albania and I went to Kosovo, I was recognized by people in the street. And I was very surprised because of the work that I had done. And even today, when I go around New York, if I'm in a restaurant, and I can always tell when the waiter is Albanian. And you know, by the way, Albanians own the best restaurants in New York.
Yeah.
The best Italian restaurants in New
Albanian.
York City are owned by Albanians. And I'll see a waiter look at me, kind of give me a funny look, and I'll know right away that he's Albanian, and he recognizes me. So I can really say that if all the work I've done in these 23, 24 years in Congress, the work I've done involving Albania and Albanians and Kosovo and Macedonia, Montenegro, is among the best work and most gratifying work that I've done. And it's true that I always go for the underdog. And Albanians, for so long, were the underdog. In Albania, because of the stranglehold of communism on Albania, and of course in Kosovo, where Albanians were the minority and were treated horribly in the former Yugoslavia by Milosevic. And now, of course, Albanians are the majority in Kosovo, and I tell my Albanian friends, you know, we have to understand that minority rights, Serb rights, have to be there. We cannot allow Albanians to treat Serbs in Kosovo the way Serbs used to treat Albanians. We have to set a better example, you know, which is why I am concerned about protecting monasteries and things like that. I mean, all religious institutions, whether they're monasteries or mosques or churches, you know, need to be protected. And so I've said that all along. So for me, it's been it started off with the underdog, but as I've gotten to know the Albanian people so well, I've really feel like I've become a part of the Albanian people, and that I have a stake in the well-being of Albania and well-being of Kosovo. And we're also, again, fighting for the minority rights, which I intend to do. By the way, when I go to Albania again in November for the celebration of the 100th anniversary, I, of course, will go to Kosovo, and I will go to Macedonia and Montenegro to speak with the governments there to make sure that the minorities, Albanian minorities in those countries, are given a fair share. There are some complaints and some questions that I want to raise with the governments. And as long as Eliot Engel is in Congress, the Albanian people will always have a spokesman and someone who cares about them and advocates on their behalf.
Thank you very much, Eliot.
Thank you.
I know you have a street named after you in Peja.
In Peja.
Anything in Albania?
No, we have to work on that.
We have to work on that. Well,
but it's great in Peja, you know, when I go there, and it's nice to see something named after you when you're still alive to see
exactly.
it. That's the way I feel.
Well, hopefully next will be somewhere in Albania. Maybe that will be decided when you